Hello and welcome to Nodes and Biscuits, a Godot game dev podcast. I'm Christoph Klestel, your host, and today we've got an episode with Jitspoe, a Godot streamer and game dev who's worked in AAA before, is now indie. He has incredible discipline, his streams are a source of valuable information for any game dev out there. He's released a game called Goop Loop, and is now working on Fist of the Forgotten and Kook. That's the episode information, let's get it going. You have an amazing discipline when it comes to streaming. Let's just start with this, really. How did you get into streaming, and how is it that you're capable of streaming basically every day?
So I started streaming. I didn't really know much about Twitch or honestly any social media stuff. I kind of stayed away from that until we were working on Lawbreakers when I was working at Bosky Productions. And then I really loved the game and I really wanted to help promote it. And so when we got into the alphas and betas and stuff, I was out there and I started live streaming the game, like as a developer playing my own game and getting involved with the community and things like that. And that's when I really started actually getting on social media and doing the streaming and, posting things on Twitter, stuff like that. So up until then, I was kind of I don't know, some of the social media stuff really rubbed me the wrong way. And I guess I just wasn't that aware of Twitch. And, I was kind of of the mindset, well, if I'm going to play a game, why would I watch other people play games,
Oh, wow, absolutely.
But I think it's really an interesting aspect of doing game development on Twitch. So, I started off doing gameplay, and then I think I might have done some development streams earlier on because I was like getting a Twitch bot set up. And so I was like doing a little bit of programming stuff, and I never really expected to get more than like 10 viewers or something like that. But like over time it grew. I feel like I'm probably one of the most like slowest but most steadily growing Twitch channels. Because, I started off in like the single digits and then, slowly crawled up to like 10. It took me forever to get to like 100 followers. And then it's just been incrementally going up little bit by little bit. And now
Absolutely.
It's like, averaging 30 or 40 viewers.
That's why the discipline is such an admirable part of it, right? Because if you can, if you can stick with it, there will be some results. Around what year was this? You mentioned that the name of the game was Lawbreakers, was it?
Yes, it was Lawbreakers. It was, I think, 2018, somewhere around there.
Okay.
2018, 2019.
And when did you start having the schedule that you have now for streaming?
Oh, gosh. I've been doing that since... Actually, it might have been 2017 that I started. Sorry, the dates all run together, especially after the pandemic nonsense and everything. It's just like... and my brain is scrambled right now from staring at C++ code earlier.
Whoa, what were you doing in C++?
Oh, I was working on the Trench Broom level editor for... so I'm making a retro FPS game, and I'm using a lot of the Quake tools to build my levels.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to add some functionality to the Trench Broom level editor. So I've been... I had all these grand ideas of things I was going to do today, and I ended up just refactoring a little bit of code and getting it to compile over the course of like 6 hours and adding zero functionality. But, it was a fun little adventure into all kinds of C++ compiler errors about template things and stuff.
I know. Actually, remind me after the podcast to send you a link. I've got friends here in Bratislava, and they're making a retro FPS as well. And
oh, nice.
And they built their very own level editor, which I think they were heavily inspired by Trench Broom. The name of the game is Godot, and they just sort of created their custom in-house editor, and they really went far with it. So maybe there is something useful there for both sides. I don't know.
Yeah, it was kind of a toss-up between, like, do I want to use existing tools or do I want to build my own tools? Because there's pros and cons to both, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if I build my own tools, it's like I could make it so it's just you're right in the game and you just start building your level in the game and you can be in there playing it immediately.
Yeah.
But then I have to catch up with like 20 plus years of development of like the Quake tools and stuff, just trying to catch up to that. And
Absolutely.
it's like, what are the like, how much time investment is it going to take for me to catch up to that, to save like a little bit of time, development time, once that's all the tooling is built. Tools are such a difficult thing to balance your time around.
They are.
Because it's like,
they are.
you want to get the tools really powerful early on so that you're saving more time, because the more time you go without building up your tools, the more time that gets wasted. Because if you build your tools to be awesome right at the very end of the project, like all of that time early on in the project you would have wasted.
Yeah.
But then if you spend all your time doing tools and you're not actually building the game, that's the other flip side. You spend all this time tooling and then you don't actually get like real development done in your project. So
no, absolutely.
I went with
and there's also a big picture point of view of this, where when you think about your community, right, there is a much bigger community already using Trench Broom, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to add modding and level editing capabilities and give them to the community, it becomes much easier if you're using a tool that's already proven and being used by others.
And that's kind of what my mindset was going in with this. I was like, well, there's a lot of mappers and stuff that are familiar with Trench Broom and the other Quake editing tools that might want to mod the game, or potentially I might hire them if I can get some funding and help, build the game faster. So like, I want to try to make it as familiar as possible. So I actually made a BSP importer for Godot.
Beautiful.
So you can just take your Quake level, compile it, and just drop it right in the Godot project, and it'll open it, and you can remap the different spawners and stuff.
Oh yeah.
For the enemies and the doors and other entities and stuff like that. And I tried to make it really flexible and actually put it up on the Godot asset store, or not asset store, but the asset library. It's free, open source. And so like, yeah, it's I'm using it for a Quake-like thing, but other people could potentially use it for whatever, and you can just specify like this entity remaps to this scene, and it's very flexible in that regard. There's another add-on called Godot. I'm not sure if you pronounce it Godot, but it's like QODOT.
Oh, I've seen that one. And I've also seen yours on the asset library.
Yeah, it takes the .map files, uncompiled .map files directly.
Wow.
So you can put those from Trench Broom directly into your project. The thing I ran into with that was that since when you build maps, you build them out of these kind of blocks called brushes. They're just like convex shapes. And so if you build, a level and you've got like the ground and the walls and the ceiling and all that kind of stuff, there's nothing that like splits those polygons up and hides the parts that are unseen.
Okay.
So even if you've got like a wall and you only have like one face of that brush showing, if you just take the map file directly over, then there's going to be all this extra overdraw. You can go in and you can like set skip textures on all the faces that you're not using, and you can kind of finagle the brushes around, but that's like a lot of extra manual work that I didn't want to do. So I just took it and made it so you can compile to the Quake BSP format, and then I made an importer in Godot that just pulls all of the BSP data that's already been cleaned up and removed all of it does all this CSG stuff. So it removes all of the stuff that's not seen, and then just the visible stuff, just the meshes that should be visible get brought over.
Right. So all of the optimization that was possibly missing from QODOT, Godot, you've got that on your side. And talking about add-ons, by the way, so you have another one. Sometimes when I first found out about your streams on Twitch, you were primarily streaming the development of Fist of the Forgotten. And I noticed that you were using a developer console there.
Yeah.
I loved it. I always took a look at it. I was like, when I grow up and I'm a big boy developer, game developer, I'll have a console just like that. And then about 2 projects ago, at a game jam project, I found out about your add-on that you released on the asset library, which is specifically that console. And I started using it, and I've got it in my game at the moment. So I'm making that. I'm making a trains game. And what's really funny is it introduced a whole new paradigm of developing a game. Because a console like that saves an immense amount of time, because you don't need to be building UIs for all of the little things that you need to test, that you want to do. You just run the command, right? And it became so useful that the whole game at the moment sort of relies on the console.
Interesting.
Because what I did is that I registered 3 main commands to the console, which is start the game in a station, start the game in a fight, or start the game normally. And these are 3 very important commands. And depending on how you run the game, first thing the game does is that it runs one of those commands. And it's quite funny to consider the fact that the game relies on a developer console.
Yeah.
How long had you been working on that, on the console?
I didn't spend too terribly long on it. So initially, when I first got into Godot, I mean, that was one of the first things that I wanted to have, and there was a Godot add-on for a console. That one felt particularly over-engineered because, to me, a console is a very simple thing. It's just like it drops down, you type a command, it runs the command, you can have some parameters, whatever. But this had, very like excessive object-oriented things. Like there was like a parameter, and then there was like subtypes of parameters for like floating points and strings, and they were all in their own like script file. And it was just like, there were like 50 script files all for this simple thing. And then the thing that made me actually make my own was that a long time ago, the Godot developers contacted me because they were working on a Switch port, and they wanted to test Fist of the Forgotten on the Switch port, but they couldn't run it because I was using that console, and that console used some regular expressions, and the regular expressions required some kind of like just-in-time compiling thing, and that was not functional on the Switch. And so like just that little console add-on was making it not possible. So I was like, all right, you know what? This thing's way over-engineered. I'm just going to make my own simple little thing. So I did that, and then eventually brought it over to Godot 4. And then when I brought it over to Godot 4, I put it up on the asset library. And then I've since had a few other people contribute. Handers did a lot of stuff to have, I think, like some autocomplete and like help system, and some of the fancier stuff you see on like
it's super
games
good.
that actually ship with the consoles, where I was just kind of doing the bare minimum. This works for me. Gotcha. And then it's like, oh cool, other people want to add some stuff, great. So you can do pull requests if there's something you're really itching to add in there and have everybody else have access to.
Truly fantastic. Yeah, that console, I can't imagine making another game without a console. So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for making it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's funny
great.
You mentioned the, driving your game through the console, because that's how a lot of the Quake stuff works. So in Quake, like I modded Quake and Quake 2, and I developed a UI system for the Paintball 2 game that I made based off of Quake 2. And I don't know if you remember some of those old games, they didn't even have like mouse support in the menu. It was like just a very basic, you just went up and down the menu with a keyboard. And so I wanted to make a nicer UI so you could actually, go through and do basic things like click on the menu and, set values and do a bunch of extra configuration and stuff like that. So I made this like, it's kind of like a menu scripting system, and basically it operated all through the console.
I see.
For like, there was a menu console command, and the menu console command as a parameter took the file name of the menu basically. So you type, menu, main menu or whatever, and that would open up the main menu. And then for each item thing, you could have like an action when you clicked on it, and that would execute a console command, which would usually be, like menu, start game or whatever. And so you would click on the thing and it would execute the thing, or you could use console variables. Now, my console system doesn't actually have console variables. It just has the console commands, but Quake has this concept of console variables. So you can set variables that's used for like server configuration and things like that. So,
Easy.
You open up a server configuration page and you set like the time limit and the maximum number of players, things like that. And those are all console variables. And then when you launch the server, when the server is running, it checks those variables to do whatever game logic it needs to do.
That's super interesting. So what you're saying is that these games were, like you say, console driven. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. So everything really was happening through the console. Is that right then? Well, not everything. I imagine that, for example, player controls, player movement wasn't being driven through the console.
Right, but yeah, you can load up Quake and never go into the menu. You can just open the console and you can type map, and then map start will bring you to the start map, and name, whatever. You can set your player name, things like that. The menu just kind of sits on top of that. Mm-hmm. Or I don't know if the original Quake menu actually sat on top of that. I think it kind of executed its own code, but the menu that I implemented, I just was like, well, we'll just use this console system that's already there.
It's already there.
It's very easy.
It works really well.
Execute a console command, and whenever you click on something, it does whatever thing needs to be there. And I would just add additional console commands for things that weren't currently supported.
Nice one. Now, I think it's about time we also delve into your projects. So,
okay.
What projects do you have active, and what projects have you released?
So let's see. Active, my three primary projects are Fist of the Forgotten, which you mentioned earlier, which is the kind of silhouette-styled, momentum-focused platformer about a young girl who lives in it's like a post-apocalyptic world, and she gets access to this giant mechanical fist that provides both combat and movement capabilities. And the
movement capabilities they're so well done. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's still on Godot 3 at the moment. I haven't converted that over to Godot 4 yet. I'm still kind of waiting on that. And then I started another project in Godot 4 to kind of test out Godot 4. It was sort of like a little side dabbling project, but it has now become my primary project. That is Kook, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is very much a Quake-inspired game. Lots of like Lovecraftian style stuff going on, and a bit of a Victorian era steampunk vibe on top of that. And it's kind of a reimagining of like what that kind of game would look like if it had more modern technology, but still like super low res, chunky pixel art textures. And so it has like the real time lighting and shadows. And I've even done some work with the shaders so that the textures themselves have self shadowing. So I've got like height maps on everything. So in Quake, like the textures were authored as they were, and if you put a light above the texture and you put a light below the texture, it would look the same. So if you have like nails or rivets sticking out of the texture and they're casting shadows downward on the texture, and you put a light underneath it, then it looks a little out of place because the shadows are all casting downward when the light is below. And I had it in my head for quite a while, like, wouldn't it be cool if we made it a game that looked like that, but the textures looked like they were like perfectly pixel art authored for the environment that they're in. So if there's like glowing red lava beneath them, there would be highlights on the bottom in red and shadows cast upward. And so that was kind of the driving force of that project. And I'm pretty happy with how some of the visuals look with that, because I've managed to get almost everything. Like, it's kind of ironic. You would think like per texel would be like simpler, but now with all the modern GPU functionality that we have, everything is like done per fragment or per pixel. Yeah, so right. You have to do everything per pixel, but then you have to figure out the calculations such that the pixel that you're drawing is drawn as though it was the pixel in the center of the texel. So we kind of have to fake like the world coordinates and stuff for the shadows, and you have to fake like if there's any kind of interpolation, if you've got like a smooth shaded object or something like that, you have to do all this crazy math with the dfdx and dfdy to kind of like approximate like where that pixel would be in the center of the texel. So there's actually a bunch of extra calculations that I do to make it not per pixel, but actually per texel. So when you go look at a texture, Can
you go into the difference between texel and pixel?
Yeah, so texel is oftentimes like when you think about a texture and how the pixels of that texture show up in the world. So if you've got a low-res texture and you walk up to a wall and you've got like 10 of the pixels of that texture showing, those would be the texels. So a texel might be covering several pixels of your screen when it's like a low-res texture. So if you go open up Quake and you have the filtering turned off and you walk up right up in front of a wall, you're going to see these big pixels taking up a large portion of your screen.
Right.
And so I wanted to preserve that aesthetic of like running in software Quake, but with modern technology.
I see what you're saying. So if I understand this right, the texel is the visual of the pixels on the screen, right? So if there's a single pixel on within the texture, but you walk right up to it, so it's a really big one taking up I don't know how many pixels on your screen, that would be the one texel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
nice.
So in this context, when I say texel, I'm referring to the pixels of the texture.
Yes.
That's the texel.
Yeah.
And then when I say pixels, I'm referring to like the pixels of your actual rendered screen. So if you're rendering it 1920 by 1080, you got a whole lot of pixels. But if you've got a really low res texture that you may walk up to the wall, you may only have a 64 by 64 like pixel image that's taking up a lot more pixels on your screen.
Oh yeah.
But it's 64 by 64 texels.
Yes. And this code, so you mentioned that you have to do a whole lot of computation around that, right? Coding around that to make sure that that it looks right. Are you doing that in C++ or shader code? How is that done?
That's in shader code. Yeah.
Shader code. Okay.
I did have to make one little modification of the engine. Fortunately, I was talking to Clay John when we went to GDC last year because I was kind of stuck on this. I can't remember what specific part of it was. It's like I got like 90% of the way there, and there was this one little thing that was off. And he was like, "Oh yeah, what you could do is just make the vertex value writable." And that was a little C++ modification that I made to the engine because normally the vertex value it's kind of weird because it's actually like the space, like the 3D space of the pixel, but it's interpolated between the vertices of whatever triangle you're drawing.
Yeah.
So if you've got 3 triangles and then you're drawing a pixel in the middle, or if you've got 3 vertices on a triangle and you're in the triangles, taking up a large amount of space on the screen, and you're drawing a pixel in the middle of that triangle, it's going to give you the interpolated value of those 3 vertices. So it's actually going to give you like the 3D space of where that pixel is, not exactly where the vertex is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird name for that variable, but it sort of makes sense when you think about it. Like, because it's like it's a vertex, but it's the interpolated value between all the vertices. Because like everything is interpolated. Like if you've got a vertex color, for example, if you've got one vertex is red over here and the vertex over here is black, then when you look at that color value, it's going to be an interpolated value between those vertices, or
Absolutely.
Same with the normal or whatever parameters you've got stored on those vertices. They're going to be interpolated.
I actually remember when I first found out about vertex colors. I remember, so this was in Blender, and I found out that feature exists, and I thought to myself, so I played around with it, and I thought to myself, this looks like a feature that no one ever needs and no one ever uses. And with experience, of course, it became one of the most valuable things in 3D art pipeline. You can do so much with those, right?
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, so one of the really cool aspects of Kook, I think, is how creative you're getting with the weapons. Could you go a little bit into the details of the weapons you have in the game now?
Yeah, so the first weapon I added to the game was this like massive 9-barreled wheel lock rifle that is based off of a real weapon that I think they mount on ships because it would be like absolutely ridiculous for a person to fire a 9-barreled rifle from the shoulder. But you know, considering some of the videos I've seen, someone's probably done it at some point. But you know, it's got 9 barrels, and of course I had to add 9 bayonets to it because, you know, if you've got 9 barrels, you got to have 9 bayonets, right?
Obviously. Yeah, it doesn't go without.
Yeah, and so that was the first weapon, and then I added a pistol. I wanted to put a revolver pistol in there, but since I'm going for a Quake-like game, and Quake doesn't have reloading, it's just like you've got guns and you just shoot them until you run out of ammo. This one's also based on a real weapon that I don't think ever got beyond the prototype stage.
Interesting.
For obvious reasons, if you ever see the actual like photographs of it. But it is a revolver that has a cylinder, and it has like 6 additional revolver cylinders going around. So you fire the 6 shots, and then the thing rotates and you get another cylinder. And it's like, you know, it's kind of your basic starter pistol, but it's also really kind of cool and steampunky. And it's a good excuse for not ever having to reload. We just kind of ignore the fact that if you've cycled through all the cylinders, there's magically somehow more ammo in there. And then I started getting to some made up, you know, kind of cool wild weapons. And I think my favorite is the Time Vampire, which is the Time Vampire has been kind of a running joke in our community with the stream, that like, you know, you try to get something done, and then all of a sudden like hours have gone by, and it's like, what happened? It's like, oh, the time vampire struck again.
I see.
So
that's nice.
So when we came to name the weapon, when I designed the weapon, like, I thought it would be really cool if it was like this massive metal cross, and like the cross opened up in the middle, and it would put like a wooden stake in there, and it would be like this pneumatic system that would fire this giant pneumatic stake, kind of in the spirit of the oh gosh, my brain is blanking out. Well, Fear has the penetrator, and then Painkiller also, not Painkiller. Gosh, wait, was it No, Max Payne is the other. Okay, Painkiller. Yes, Painkiller was the one that had a giant spike gun as well. So I was kind of doing something in that spirit. Like, I wanted to have a massive spike gun that you could like pin enemies against the wall, because that's super fun. But the alternate fire on this thing is a time distortion bubble. So you fire it out, it fires a projectile, and then when the projectile hits, it creates this sphere, and basically anything in that sphere gets slowed down, and you get slowed down more toward the middle. So it creates this kind of cool effect as stuff goes into it, because I implemented it where it slows the pitch down of all the audio players on anything that goes down, and it slows the animation down of everything, and it slows the movement down. And so everything gets scaled down. So you hear this enemy like run in there like, yes. And then you've got time to just like carefully place all your shots, and you can fire all these projectiles and watch even the projectiles get slowed down. So you see the projectiles hit that time bubble, and they all slow down. And I finally, you know, got the pinning to walls implemented, which is like my dream vision of the gun. Just like, you have a group of enemies run up, you fire the alt fire at them, they all go into slow motion, kind of freeze in the middle. You walk around, take some shots, and then the time bubble expires, and then all of the projectiles at once hit all of the enemies and they all go flying and get pegged up against the walls.
I saw that. I saw a video you put on Twitter regarding this, where it gets all slowed down. You do your thing. You shoot it from different angles, and then you wait for it to go away to cancel that time slowing effect, and then it all happens at the same time. It looked fantastic.
Thank you.
And yeah, and so now you also have the wall pinning mechanic. Is that a recent addition? When was that put
Yeah,
in?
the wall pinning is somewhat recent because I had to get all the animations and stuff set up there, and I had to kind of fake stuff a little bit because most of the time the projectiles are like on their way down when they hit enemies. So it's sort of unrealistically kind of go upward, but fun over realism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because otherwise you'd have to like crouch. I mean, I don't have crouching in the game, so you can't really, like, if there's on the same level as you can never really pin them against walls. They'd have to be like up above you. But there's just a little extra upward arc when it hits something.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
Some of the other weapons still getting fleshed out, but actually the flamethrower is pretty close to being done. So the primary fire is your typical flamethrower. It shoots out flame projectiles. I don't have anything getting set on fire yet. That still needs to be done. But the alt fire is kind of like a jet, and it has a really strong impulse. So you can use it to knock enemies back, and you can use it to fling physics objects really hard into enemies, or just launch stuff around, or blow doors open, things like that. That's another thing that's big in Kook that wasn't in Quake, is there's a lot of physics objects. So we're getting kind of like Half-Life 2 territory with things that can be thrown around and used as
when you grab a gravity gun and you shoot
weapons.
Something heavy.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
People, right? And
exactly. Yeah. And so that's just like another toy to play with as far as all that goes, because you can pick items up. One of my viewers, Fublaz, really wanted me to be able to pick up books and throw them at enemies. So you can pick up books, and then there's some other miscellaneous physics objects. Great way to deal with cultists. A lot of cultists come about because of their lack of education. So you just throw the book at them, and sometimes they explode into chunks and they're not really a problem anymore.
Well, killing enemies with books is just about one of the best things I've heard of ever. Books are dangerous, and now we know why.
Yeah. The fun thing is, like, there's all these different systems, like the alt fire on the flamethrower, but you can also kick, and you can kick objects around and applies an impulse to them, and you can pick up objects and you can drop objects, and by transitive property you can pick up and then drop kick objects to give them a little more of a boost than if you just threw them. So and then the damage is based on the actual like impulse when it hits an enemy. So if you hit somebody really hard with something, they might just explode into some chunks instead of walking around anymore.
Oh yeah. Best feeling ever also when that happens, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
You probably also feel really smart as a player if you manage to get that. If there's a situation and you create this creative strategy of destroying that enemy by making use of the environment. That's lovely.
Yeah. It's also really hard to pull off the drop kicks because it's all purely based on this. I didn't explicitly implement a drop kick where, like, if you drop an item and then you kick it, it goes exactly where your crosshair is. It's like if you drop an item and then you kick it when it's at just the right altitude, it'll have the correct trajectory to hit an enemy at a distance.
Right.
But if you kick it too soon, it won't have dropped far enough, and it'll end up going upward. And if you kick too late, you'll kick it kind of down into the ground. And if you're moving to the side, then it may shoot off somewhere else because it wasn't lined up with your foot when you kicked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this something that the game can specifically identify so that you can reward the player with an announcement of some sort? Drop kick kill.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't really gotten into the achievement side of things. I'm still working on kind of the core stuff, but that would be a fun, like, little achievement or shout out or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Now, in your game development, this is something I've been meaning to ask you for years, by the way. in your game development, you go into these intricate details that seem to mesh various disciplines together, right? So you go into intricate 3D animation, and then you're capable of using it in your games with very smart coding around it. And I wanted to ask, how did you learn enough about all of those disciplines to be able to put them together so well, right? Because, for example, in Fist of the Forgotten, you have a super good mechanic for the movement where it's momentum based, right? So you can really play around with it. And at the same time, you also went ahead and did a full-blown cutscene in 3D. That was amazing. Yeah, how did you get to this point where you can do all of those things, where you do programming on a highly skilled level of programming, but also in 3D?
Well, I have never been the type that likes to just sit down and do one thing. There's a lot of people that have their niche, and that works really well in like the AAA industry, where you have oftentimes like a subset of a subset of a subset of something that you're working on, and then that's like all you do for years.
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that likes to jump around and do all kinds of different stuff, because if I'm stuck doing the same thing over, it's just like, I don't know. It kind of hurts me on like a psychological level. It's like I gotta do some other things. And so when I was in AAA, I was doing gameplay programming, which I think is probably the best fit for me, because it's not quite doing all of the different disciplines, but it's connecting all of the different disciplines. Like the gameplay programmer kind of connects the sound and the animation and the movement and physics and all of these different things, and it's kind of where everything intersects. Because you have all these different disciplines. You have animators that animate the character running, and then you have the physics programmers that deal with like the collision and all that kind of stuff and optimizations, and then you have the sound designers that are making the footstep sounds and all of those things, and then the gameplay programmer comes along and like connects all of those things together so that they are one kind of cohesive thing. And when the player moves, they physically move, they play the run animation, they play the footstep sounds, etc. And so I had years of experience doing that. And prior to my AAA experience, and kind of jumping back to the third project that I'm working on that we didn't quite get to, I had been working in like Quake and Quake 2, doing modding and building levels and building textures. And so when you're on a small team or just making little mods for yourself, you kind of have to figure out how to do all the different little things like that. And so my third project, which I'm not working on as actively as Fist of the Forgotten or Kook, is digitalpaint Paintball 2, which was originally a mod for Quake 2. This is not built in Godot, but maybe someday, if there's enough interest, I might consider bringing it over to the Godot engine and kind of remastering some things.
Very interesting. Yeah.
But that's based off of the Quake 2 engine, or idTech 2 as they call it now. And when that went open source, I kind of took it and ran with it and made it its own standalone game, because it was basically a complete total conversion when it was a Quake 2 mod. And so then I went in and, the engine's open source. Now we can go in and add features like higher resolution textures and reflective water and other things to make the game look nicer, and also add some improvements in quality of life things, fix bugs, stuff like that. And I periodically work on that. I actually put out an update December, so just a month or two ago, and I'm actively working on adding latency compensation. It's a multiplayer only game, so it's 2024, finally getting some latency compensation in there.
At long last.
And that has seemed to really improve the experience for a lot of people, because we've got people all over that are playing. So if you're playing with people in the US and people in Europe, and you have to compensate for that ping, especially when you're playing with a projectile based game, makes it really difficult because you have to like lead your shots and you're aiming like 20 feet in front of a person in order to be able to actually hit them, because between the projectile speed and the latency of the client and server communication, where you see the person is like where they were a while ago, and now with the latency compensation, it actually makes it so hopefully it makes it like you're playing with no latency whatsoever. I mean, there's still a delay for the visuals and stuff to come out because all of the entities are handled on the server. There's no client side prediction on the shots or anything like that, but it will make it as you should be able to aim at the same spot regardless of ping with the latency compensation.
Right. You also worked on this on stream, right?
Yeah.
I think I remember a stream where you were working on the latency compensation.
Yeah, that's like my Saturday wildcard streams.
That's the one. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, what's your streaming schedule like specifically? So
I try to start around 7 p.m. Eastern time, but that has been slipping a lot lately. So it's oftentimes closer to 8 or maybe 7:30. Actually, I think 7:07 was my official starting time, but I haven't started that early in quite some time. But it's, yeah, so basically I start around there and then go, I don't know, till midnight or 1 or 2 or 3 a.m. depending on how involved. I try to get to like a good wrapping up point. It was kind of a late one tonight because I couldn't even get to the point of getting the code to compile again because it's doing this refactoring because the tool was designed to have a single brush.
Okay.
We're jumping all over the place here, but hopefully that's fine for the viewers.
Completely fine. Yeah.
The tool was designed to have a single brush, and I worked on adding like cylinder functionality, and that's still a single convex shape. But if you want to add a tube, the brush-based system that Quake uses has to have convex shapes. So if you want a tube, you have to break that up into a whole bunch of sections, one for each side of the tube, because otherwise it would be concave shape and you can't do your typical convex like collision detection and all that kind of stuff. And the CSG calculations and stuff they're all really fast and optimal if you have a convex shape. So which is effectively just like a bunch of planes, and you can do a bunch of quick calculations and dot products and stuff to calculate that stuff. So that's what the compiler and the physics and all that stuff use in Quake, instead of more of a mesh-based system that we use today. Although we do still often use convex shapes for collision.
Yeah, because they're super fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No holes.
But the editor, the Trenchbroom editor, it's set up and it just has like a pointer to a single brush for the tools. And so I had to set it up so it's like, well, now we need like an array of brushes, which means now all these functions that were handling this single brush need to handle an array of brushes, and is using a bunch of like C++ code that I'm not super familiar with, doing like unique pointers and standard moves and stuff like that. When I do C++, I tend to do just like C with classes kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
And so this code base is like, very unfamiliar with, and like, figuring out the Qt UI and stuff like that, which I wasn't super familiar with. So spent a lot of time basically getting stuff to the point of just running again and not adding any functionality whatsoever. But now hopefully it's in a place where I can add that functionality. It's just, when will I find the time to work on that again?
Right. So did you manage to get it to a point where you could compile it at the end of the
Yeah, I
stream?
did finally get it to compile again, and then it seemed to work, and I was like, all right, we're calling the stream here because if I try something else, it'll probably be completely broken, and then I'll be like, I gotta fix this, and then I'll be late for our interview or podcast thing, and then I don't know.
No, I think that's a good thing to do, because when you start something big again, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you don't even finish it by the end of the stream if you decide to do another big thing. And yeah, it's nice to wrap up a stream with a success. I think that works really well. Do you stream every day?
I stream pretty much every day except for Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So Sundays are my days where I play games with friends and kind of chill and relax. So
nice.
But yeah, I stream development in my Godot games pretty much every weeknight, and then Saturday is kind of a wild card. We have the Paintball 2 social Saturdays that we do every other Saturday, which take place earlier, and then sometimes that Saturday night I'll do maybe some other development stream or play some other games.
Interesting.
And then I also try to make a small drop in the ocean, getting through my Steam backlog and competitive research and stuff. I'm always adding more games than I'm playing.
That's the curse of Steam, isn't it? I've got the same thing, and it's so hard to go back to Steam and play a new game, because well, I can speak for myself. I really want to be playing those games, but it's a time investment. Mm-hmm. And getting into them. It's good to have a day of the week that is specifically set aside for this.
Right.
I also wanted to ask you, how do you do it that you can keep on streaming so consistently nearly every day? Is there a magic formula to this? Is there something that you have found that allows you to do this, or are you just a sort of a person that is capable of doing that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like asking someone how they can get up and go to work every day. It's just a lot of people look at game dev as a thing that you have to have continuous motivation to do. And, oftentimes that's true if it's a hobby and you're just wanting to do it for fun. But like, if you're serious about doing game dev as a profession and you want to actually make progress on your game, you can't sit there and wait for the motivation to hit and then just do work when you have that motivation. Like, it's severely a discipline thing. And
I agree. Yeah.
I think this streaming actually really helps me, because I've got this schedule and I've got people that kind of expect me and are anticipating me to get on there and start streaming. Whereas if I'm not streaming, it's really easy to get distracted, and it's like, well, I was watching this tutorial video. Oh, what's this related video over here? And then, 5 hours later, you realize you've got nothing done and you've just been watching cat videos or something like that. Like, it's really easy, for me anyway, to get completely lost and not even know where the time went. It's just like, oh, it's 4 a.m. now? What happened? Whereas if I'm streaming, I'm actually, even if I'm getting distracted by some of the crazy nonsense and stuff that we've got going on in my stream, I'm actually, like, I have the projects open and I'm in the general vicinity of getting work done on my projects. And it's a lot easier to, maybe get briefly distracted, but then you come back and then you're like, okay, let's figure this problem out.
Whereas, very nicely put.
Yeah.
Yeah, streaming does help immensely at really working on your project overall. You're focused, you're there, that works.
It's really important just to have a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that schedule is, just stick with it.
Mm.
And even if you're not necessarily in the mood, it's just like, all right, well, this is the time that I stream. I just gotta, get ready, hit the start stream button.
I like that. And I think that's something important to know as well, that it's not only about doing it when you feel like it, but it's also about doing it when you just do it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where the rule of no 0 days comes from, right?
Yeah, that's important
too. People mention this. Yeah, where you just, there's just one rule. You never have a day where you don't do anything, unless of course you can have weekends off.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need to.
Yeah, don't completely burn yourself out. Yeah, but like, if you're doing work days or whatever days you have free, if you're working a day job, if you got like you're scheduled, these are my game dev days, and like you said, you don't have a 0 day, because sometimes you're not in the mood and you have no motivation, and then as soon as you sit down, you see something in your game and you're like, I need to fix that, or wouldn't it be cool if, or wow, I've just thought of this cool mechanic. And like, if you never sat down and started that day, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where like a lot of times you may not be motivated, you may not be in the mood, but as soon as you start, like that spark fires off, and then 4 hours later you realize you've been like working away and getting all sorts of cool stuff done.
Yeah, and that really happens. That really happens, and it's a real thing where, because it's not about the fact that you need to wait for motivation. It's that you create an opportunity for the motivation to appear.
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen, right? Just like you said, you turn the game on, or sometimes you go for a walk, you look at a tree and you go, trees, I need to have one in my game. So the more opportunities you create for it, the more space it has to actually appear. I also, you mentioned burnout, and I remember years ago, this was a fairly long time ago, 5 years ago or so, I was talking to an artist, a professional digital artist that also did work for Blizzard, I think. And he was, so he had a talk, and someone asked him, so what about burnout? And he looked at them, dead serious, and he says, I'm a professional, but I don't do burnout. And it was along those similar lines. It almost sounded very similar to this, where, of course, this was his subjective point of view. We're all different, but to him, working on digital painting and doing that as a profession meant that he's just going to do it regardless of whether he's motivated or not. That's a decision he's made, and there is no way a burnout can get to him. But I don't know, it would be interesting to talk to him again now and ask whether that's ever appeared, because it can get to you, I imagine. Have you ever been through burnout?
Nothing severe. I've definitely had those days where it's been like, sometimes you just like there's nothing, like you just feel like I'm just gonna sit here, like I don't even want to like watch videos or scroll through doom scroll or any. It's just like I'm just like the day is done. I'm just gonna veg out and like but yeah, I think it's something that affects people differently, and you've got to know what your threshold is. And I've been trying to maintain a healthy balance when I'm doing, like, I'm streaming every day, but I'm not streaming obscene hours. Right. I'm usually streaming 5 or 6 hours, which is less than a typical work day, but it's also more intense. And then there's some additional stuff that I do off stream. Yeah. But like, you gotta, my thinking going into this as an indie dev is that if I have to completely burn myself to the core just to make a game, and that game sells and it's like just enough to cover cost of living, what does that say? That says I need to keep doing that for the next project, because that's not healthy. Like, I'm not going to sacrifice my mental and physical well-being just to make sure that I can like do this. Like, if I do it and I work reasonable hours and it works, awesome. If it doesn't, then I'll just have to get a job somewhere else to cover the bills.
Yeah.
And so, I always make sure that, I set enough time aside to get sleep and take a walk and eat and all that stuff. And, ideally some extra time. But if it ever gets to the point of like, I'm working so hard that I'm not able to get a proper amount of sleep, or I don't want to take my walk today because I don't really have the time for it, then that's when I sit there and reevaluate. It's like, okay, I need to cut back on some stuff, or, like, just figure out how to manage this.
I mean,
so that I'm not like completely wearing myself out.
Definitely. I mean, your health is your primary responsibility, right? Yeah. Because it allows you to work tomorrow, allows you to do what you want to do the next week, the next month, the next year. It will allow you to have health when when you age. It's just the most important thing.
Right. And if you're struggling to pay the bills while you're healthy, just imagine if you have, monthly medications or doctor visits and all that additional stuff on top of that, because that gets stupid expensive, at least in the U.S. where I am.
Oh, yeah. The U.S. is well known for that, isn't it? Actually. It's sometimes it's hard to imagine for people, for example, from the EU, Europe. But yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that while you have it.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, hopefully you continue to have it, but
let's hope so.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I keep hearing things about people wanting to privatize healthcare and stuff over there, and I'm like, no, please.
Yeah, I don't know what is going to happen. It feels like the world is going to various extremes day by day. But but back to streaming. How do you think? Right. So let's say that you stream for 4 or 5 hours. And then if you compare that to working in an office for 8 hours, how do you think that compares in terms of the amount of work and focus that you put into the project?
It's definitely a lot higher intensity, and also,
streaming or being in an office?
Streaming. Sure. I would say, because it's like, I don't know, if you're in an office, sometimes you can kind of zone out a little bit, but if you're streaming, it's like you got to be like there in the moment all the time. And I guess it kind of varies. It probably depends on your job and your office environment. Because when I was working at Bosky, it could be pretty crazy too, because we had, all kinds of discussions going on. And so that one was very different than when I was working at Red Storm. When I was at Red Storm, everyone just kind of sat at their desk with their headphones on, and they were all focused on their own thing.
Right.
And then at Bosky, it was a lot more like chaotic, which it really kind of surprised me how I was able to learn to like focus and program and stuff with all of that like background distraction going on, because in the past I almost had to have like complete silence, complete focus, couldn't listen to music, anything like that. Like if I'm going to program, like I have to like be in this sort of isolated mindset, a little quiet room type thing.
Oh, yeah.
And then when I started working at Bosky, and it was like, people are just like having conversations and doing mouth noises, talking about all these abilities, and and it's like you're like having two things going on at the same time, where you're like kind of tuned into this conversation, but you're also trying to like get the programming done and stuff like that. And so that was pretty high intensity. I really like working there, but it kind of, like I said, the intensity of streaming versus workplace really kind of depends on the workplace you're working at.
Right.
So
that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that one. Yeah. Because to me, streaming, like you say, is really high intensity, where, even if you go on a break, but the moment you come back, you are right there in front of the project. You're right there in front of what you've set out to do. Whereas at work, it feels, well, from my experience, that you can, like you say, zone out, but you can also talk to your colleagues. So I think the intensity is definitely higher with streaming, which could potentially translate to being more productive, but I'm going to hold off on that. I'm not sure. Yeah,
it's like I said, I think it varies from person to person. Streaming works really well for people like me who easily get, completely distracted by different things. I haven't been diagnosed, but I have a strong suspicion based on some videos I've seen, that I have ADHD, and I think streaming really acts kind of like what they call body doubling. And
Ooh,
body
what is
doubling
this?
is where, so for people with ADHD, simply having another person in the room, even if that person is not like engaged with them, just having another body there, like, helps them keep focused, because I guess it acts as a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? My brain just completely blanked out on that.
But that's super interesting. Right?
Responsibility type thing. But
So
accountability. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah,
right.
Accountability. So I think it adds like a little bit of accountability there. Just because if someone's in the room with you and you need to be programming, you're less likely to be like, I don't know, watching videos on YouTube or scrolling on your phone or something like that. Whereas if you're just sitting there by yourself, you're going to go chase whatever is going to give you the most dopamine in the moment. And I think when you're streaming, even if there's, people in chat doing crazy things and, a lot of chaos is going on, it at least gives you that extra bit of accountability that kind of keeps you focused.
Yeah.
And so I find it really helpful personally. Both having people there just for the accountability point, and also sometimes you have people in there that know the solution to whatever issue you're dealing with. Like,
that's super useful in streaming.
Yeah, I might be in Blender trying to figure something out, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, you just click on that thing over there," and it's like, "Oh sweet, cool."
Yeah.
Or like some people were helping out with some of the arcane template compiler errors I was getting in C++ today. It's like, maybe you just need to include the error header file, and it's like, oh yeah, that fixed it. But like, based on the error,
you wouldn't know.
I had no idea.
It's just people with experience in the chat,
right? Yeah,
and they are there because it could have it. I've noticed that sometimes I watch streams when I work because it helps me to have something related to game development in the background. And I like that. I like working like that. So I imagine that also people in the chat sometimes can function this way, right? They like to have something in the background. They listen to it, they watch it, but at the same time they're working. And that's I like how that dynamic goes both ways.
Yeah, I love when it I personally struggle. I can't have a stream on in the background because I tend to try to engage with the streamer. They'll say something, I'll be in there and chat, and so like I can't really focus on my stuff. But some people talk about having my stream on in the background and it helps them focus on their work, and I'm like, I don't know how you can focus with all the chaos that happens on my stream, but I'm glad it's working out for you. And I'm glad you're somehow learning something.
Great. Yeah. I'm capable of doing both, and sometimes I am on your streams. And working, right? So I've got your stream in the background, and it's just, I think there's something very nice about knowing that someone else is making progress.
Yeah.
And that somehow inspires me to also be making progress. So I suspect that could be it.
So it's great. We kind of build each other up, The
Absolutely.
audience helps me stay focused, and I help them be motivated to work on stuff, and we're all making progress and making cool stuff.
Yeah,
it's an amazing experience.
I haven't realized how nice streaming is till now, actually. But now, you were actually streaming Godot before Godot exploded. Before Godot was not exploded. It's not like it's the most well-known engine in the world at the moment, but it definitely has received more recognition. And you were streaming way before that. What were people saying about the engine back then? Do you remember?
I mean, there were a lot of people curious and wondering why I was using that over Unity and stuff like that. And but I kind of gave them the same answer. Is I was looking for a free open source engine because I wanted to do a lot of stuff from scratch, but I didn't want. I knew my limits, and I wasn't gonna like build an entire engine from scratch because that's just going to take too much time. And so I was looking for an open source project to kind of give me a leg up. and a couple people had mentioned Godot, and I checked it out, and within a couple hours I was like making stuff, and I was like, wow, this is
awesome.
This is really nice. Like, and then, you know, just never really looked back.
Nice. How, well, what do you think about Godot 4? Because you mentioned that you have been thinking about converting Fist of the Forgotten over to Godot 4. Why haven't you made that switch yet?
So one of the big things is the physics engine.
Right.
They were using the bullet physics engine in Godot 3, and they decided to drop that for Godot 4 to try to do their own internal thing. And like, I understand the desire to not have dependencies, because dependencies can be a real nightmare to both maintain and just, you know, build and all that kind of stuff. But Godot 4, the physics really was not ready for being like the only option. So that was a thing, and fortunately somebody took Jolt, which is an open source physics engine,
absolutely,
and made an add-on for that. So that's what I'm using on Kook. But even with that, I'm still running into some performance issues and things that still need to be addressed. So I've actually had to cut down on the amount that the enemies move, because if like all the enemies are doing movement on the same frame, it really hurts the performance.
Yeah.
So need to figure out what's going on with that. Now I don't know if that is better in Godot 3 or not, because Godot 3, my platformer has enemies, but they're kind of sparse. There's not like a whole lot of enemies going on at the same time on the screen. So, you know, the updates are fairly simple in that regard.
Right.
The other thing is, it's just they've changed. You know, Godot 4 was when they took an opportunity to kind of refactor and rename a whole bunch of things.
They did, yeah.
And so, you know, like the spatial node became node 3D, which makes sense. You know, it's like more consistent. You've got node 2D and node 3D, and they added, like, in Godot 3, everything was just sort of like 3D was the default, and then there was whatever 2D. Now in Godot 4, you've got this 2D and this 3D. So, like, consistency wise, it makes more sense. But when you're going through a project that you've been working on for like 5 years, and you've got to convert everything over and like deal with all the fallout and potential bugs, like I imagine it's probably going to be a month of just getting it back to where it was.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Do you think it's going to be worth it?
Well, I think the big potentials for converting over are like support for console platforms. Like W4 is working on adding support for the PlayStation, and I think Godot 3, there's a company that does there are a couple companies that will do like Switch ports, so I could probably get it on the Switch with Godot 3. But there's a lot of benefits to Godot 4. There's a lot of quality of life things too. Like, they added the ability to drop blend files directly in your project.
I love that.
And under the hood, it will export the GLTF format and re-import it. And at first I was like, well, that seems kind of silly. Why don't, you know, it would be a lot better if they just directly supported the blend format, and, you know, this is just basically doing the same thing it was already doing, but it's automated. But then after I started using it for a while, it's like, oh, this is so much more convenient, because now when I go back and work on Fist of the Forgotten, it's like, okay, well, I have my Blender file, and then every time I want to update it and test something in the game, I have to like file, export, go to GLTF, export it into a different directory, and then, you know, wait for that to finish, and then go and switch over to Godot, and then it's got to import. And there's a big thing to be said for automating like several potentially time consuming, like depending on how complex your model and animations are, sometimes it can take several seconds to import it, and it's like if you have to wait several seconds to export and then wait to import it, well, Godot is usually pretty fast for the importer. The exporting can be kind of slow on Blender because it's using Python.
Yeah.
But the if that whole process can just be one thing, you just save, alt tab over, and then boom.
It's so much faster. And
Yeah.
one thing that it really saves me time on is whenever in Godot 3, when I was exporting from Blender, I always had to remember what export options to trigger, because I'm super bad at creating presets for the export options in Blender, so I always had to trigger the right ones, and that just took extra 10, 15, sometimes 20 seconds. And now all of that is automated. No, it's just like you say, it's a one-click thing. You just save the file, you hop over to Godot update it. That's so good. Yeah.
The only downside is when there's an error in the export, then you don't, it doesn't, there's not like good feedback. I've run into this a few times. I think a lot of those GLTF exporter errors have been fixed, but sometimes it acts like it imported, but it didn't actually import because the export failed, and because the export is running in Blender behind the scenes, there's no feedback. Like if there's an importer error, you get the log in Godot, but basically what would happen is Godot says, hey, the blend file updated, and then it runs and it exports the blend file to GLTF, but some error happened, so the GLTF file never updated. So then you're like, well, why isn't my animation in here, or why isn't this changing? And then you go and track it down and realize that, oh, there was an error when exporting the GLTF file. Or I ran into one today, or not today, a couple days ago, where I saved something in Blender 4 and my editor was still pointing to Blender 3.5, and 3.5 struggles to open Blender 4 files.
Yeah.
So same kind of scenario happened. Like it went and it tried to import and it didn't actually update the file.
But, and the error messages, I think that's sometimes it's one of my biggest gripes with Godot, when I get an error message and I have no idea what it means. It's not very descriptive, and in order to find out what it means, I sometimes dig into the source code. So I take a look at the source code and I go, well, it's just numbers. it's just numbers, and it's a division happened there. Okay. But yeah, what would you say is your biggest pain point at the moment with Godot 4?
Well, like I said earlier, the physics are still a pain point for me. At the moment, I'm running into some performance issues. I've got a large level and I'm using a lot of dynamic lights, and I just filed a bug with them because I tried to do the distance fade on the lights so that they're not updating, but there seems to be a bug where even if you set the distance fade to like 5 meters and you're 100 meters away, it's still updating the shadows on those lights.
Oh, damn.
So, like the performance wasn't improving, and I was like, wait a minute. If I hide the lights, the performance goes up. And so like, I had to figure out, did a minimal repro case and kind of pin down what the problem was. And
so it was still updating the shadows, although there were no shadows to be shown because they were too weak, but it was trying to update the shadows then.
Right, yeah. And so there's actually a different parameter for the distance fade for the shadows, so you can actually have maybe the lights stay on, but the shadows disable over distance, so that should disable the updating of them. But like the culling, so I enabled the culling feature, and the culling was actually culling the lights out, and it was improving the performance, but the distance fade wasn't. And I was like, wait a minute, something's not right here.
Yeah, this should work.
But it was kind of funny because in order to repro the issue, I had to put quite a few more lights in the scene than I anticipated, and actually have something dynamic and moving to kind of force the shadows to update. So I think there might be something else going on, because there wasn't anything around the lights moving that should have even been causing those lights to move. So I think like the lights are all sharing one big atlas, and I think there might have been some logic going on that was like swapping the lights around, because it's basically got this system where you share one large atlas texture for all the shadow maps, and it will swap them out based on certain criteria. Like if you get closer to a new light and it needs to have a higher resolution shadow, then it'll render that to the higher resolution part of the atlas. and or if something moves near the light and that needs to update the shadows, then it'll update the shadows.
Sounds
but
smart.
I think there was something funky going on because the shadows should not have even been updating for those particular lights, because it was like I didn't even have the enemies in that area yet that would have been around those lights. Now at some point I am going to have enemies there, so those shadows will probably be updating. And actually something that would be nice is if there was a way for the lights to be staggered in their updates. So, you know, if you've got 1,000 lights in your scene and something moves, you don't want all of those 1,000 lights re-rendering their shadows all at once. It would be nice if there was a way to stagger it based on, you know, proximity or priority or something like that. Like if I've got a big spotlight, I want like the spotlight has priority, so the shadows aren't all stuttery on that one. Absolutely. But maybe you only update like 2 or 3 lights per frame, so you don't run into these performance issues.
Yeah, that sounds like something.
I might not have even noticed the bug with the distance fade, but
yeah.
There's definitely room. There's room for improvement in some of these performance things. Like I said, it was funny when I tried to reproduce the issue. I created a scene similar to what I had, and I was like created this giant cylinder, and I put lights all around it. And I ran it, and I was getting like 2,000 FPS, and I was like, "Holy cow! Like, why isn't my game running at 2,000 FPS?" And then when I started moving something, then it dropped down to like 500. So, you know, percentage-wise, that's 500 still a good frame rate, but percentage-wise, that was a pretty significant hit. And it's like, okay, so stuff like this is going on all around, and we're updating a bunch of lights that shouldn't be updated. Then I can see where that's going to cause some performance issues.
Oh, certainly.
But it was kind of neat to see that, like, you know, a whole pile of dynamic lights was running at 2,000 FPS. So it gives me hope that I can get my game running at a really nice frame rate. It's just
I hope we all do.
Growing pains.
Yeah. It also sounds like really something that if that gets solved, it improves the performance of very many games, right?
Yeah.
All at the same time across the board. Just really good stuff on that one. Right. And do you have a feature in Godot 4 that's just by far the thing you enjoy most ever since you've, you know, because we were all using Godot 3 before, now it's Godot 4. Is there something that you really appreciate about the way that maybe the editor or something under the hood works differently?
Well, yeah, like I was saying, there's a lot of little quality of life things, like the you know, being able to put blend files directly in your project that just make it just so much more convenient. And it's one of those things where, like, I'm trying to think of other stuff at the moment, but as soon as I go back and try to work on a project in Godot 3, then I'll realize, oh yeah, then there's that, and there's that.
Absolutely.
Like, there's all these, there's just a bunch of little quality of life things that make it a lot more enjoyable that I didn't really even know that I was missing before, because it's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. You just, you know, file export, and then you move on with your life. But then it's like, you know, when you're doing that sometimes thousands of times, all those few seconds add up. They do.
It's just those, it really is the paper cuts, isn't it? It really is the paper cuts. They do add up, and then, you know, it's seconds to minutes, minutes to hours to days. And we never notice. Yeah. For me, one of those things was definitely the export, being able to export nodes. That was very big for me.
Copy pasting nodes. I think they might have added that back into Go. That might have been backported in Godot 3, but like,
it was backported, yeah, but that was also a very big and lovely thing.
That was a nice thing in Godot 4.
Damn. Well, yeah. Jitspoe, thank you very much for the podcast.
You're welcome.
It was, like I said, I've been following you on Twitch for a super long time, and I've been meaning to have a conversation with you for a really long time as well. This is finally the time. Where and how can people follow you?
So I am Jitspoe, Jitspoe, on pretty much anything. You know, Jitspoe on Twitch and Twitter, and now like Blue Sky. Mastodon, I think I'm mastodon.social, so there's like there's a bunch of different servers, so I got in on the early ones when they still had openings on mastodon.social. So nice. I'm Jitspoe there, and then I'm not on Facebook or Instagram, so don't follow me there. I'm on TikTok too.
You are? How's TikTok going?
TikTok is actually probably one of my strongest platforms as far as getting visibility.
Awesome.
I heard people mention TikTok for like marketing, and at that point I was like most people when I was like, isn't that just the app where people just like dance and lip sync? Like, what am I gonna do? Like dance and be like, ooh, buy my game? And I was like, well, maybe that would work. But then once I got on the platform, like I realized there was a lot more stuff there, and it kind of depends on how the algorithm has catered itself towards you. So for me, I've like saw all kinds of stuff about ADHD, and that's when I was like, hey, wait a minute, this is like, these are symptoms. Like, I never thought I had ADHD because I'd like hyper focus on things, and then like, oh, hyper focus is a symptom of ADHD, and it's like, wait a minute, all of these other things, wait, okay. So there's like a whole lot of interesting things, even issues that I didn't have, but it's really interesting to see firsthand people talking about these things, like schizophrenia and Tourette syndrome, and obviously ADHD and autism and stuff. And it's just like, it's really enlightening to kind of get like just sort of like firsthand, not like, reading something from a textbook or a news outlet or something like that, like actual people with these issues talking about them and their experiences. And like I said, that's how I thought I learned I might have ADHD. And but then you follow like indie devs and stuff like that on there, and then your feed is all kinds of stuff about that, and I very rarely see people dancing. But I had a few videos. Actually, the Goop Loop stuff seemed to do pretty well on there, which is a game I don't think we ever mentioned on this podcast, which is the one game that I've finished using the Godot engine, which is a kind of Bennett Foddy style platformer where you're a goop stuck in a loop. It was originally a Ludum Dare game, and you would jump and stick, and so you had to use these kind of like awkward physics to maneuver around a level. And then I've got a bunch of narration and stuff on top of it to kind of, harass and encourage the player and make some puns and stuff. But yeah, I had a video of Goop Loop that like blew up on there and got like 1 million views, which kind of blew my mind.
Wonderful. Nice. What was the conversion like on 1 million views?
It was not super great. That is the downside to TikTok, is most people they're scrolling on their phones because it's not really like, I think you can access it on PC, but you can't, I don't know if you can log in. For a while, you couldn't even like log in on PC, like on a browser. So most people watching TikTok are just scrolling through their phones. So you can get awareness that way, and people will be like, oh, that game looks kind of cool. And then they scroll on to the next video and probably forget about it. But maybe if they see it again somewhere else, they'll be like, oh yeah, that one, I should check that out.
Right.
So like, it doesn't get a lot of direct conversion rate, but it is good for getting visibility. And I think it's important to get, like, you have to get your game out there on several different platforms so that people see it in different contexts. Because I've heard people have to see something like 3 or 4 times before they'll buy it. So like, you might have one video that gets 1 million views, but hardly any people are going to buy it off of that one video. But if they see it there and then see somebody like retweet it somewhere on Twitter and then see it on YouTube or something else, then that's when you get people like, oh yeah, I should grab that.
Yeah, it's the
Marketing
effect of seeing billboards with the same products everywhere, right? You suddenly feel like, this is clearly a thing. I should take note of this thing. And then the next time you have the option of buying a thing that you've seen everywhere, there's a higher chance of you doing it. So from that perspective, it makes sense. It's sort of like not a direct conversion, but the secondary conversion, right? It increases the chances of them converting.
Yep.
Nice. All right. So TikTok, Twitter, Twitch. You mentioned not Facebook or Instagram. And Steam. Okay. So list out the names of the games that you've got on there.
Okay. So we've got Fist of the Forgotten. Not First of the Forgotten, which is something a lot of people tend to confuse it with, but Fists of the Forgotten, like punching. And if you forget the name, then you remembered half of it because, Fists of the Forgotten. I can't. So many times, this is so hilarious to me. The first time it happened, I thought it was a bit like a streamer, I don't know if I rated him or came in the stream or something. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're the one that was working on Fist. What was it? Fist of the?" And I was like, yeah, very funny." And then they legitimately had forgotten. And then it happened to like 3 other people, and it's like, okay, I don't know what it is. Maybe
it's a good one.
Using the word "forgotten" in my name was a curse because it was subconsciously making people forget. But if you forget the name, you've remembered it as long as you remember the fist part.
The moment you forget, you remember.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's Goop Loop, which is the one that you can buy. Actually, A Fist of the Forgotten also has a demo that's available right now, so you can actually play part of the game and check it out and get a feel for the physics and stuff. And Kook, Kook, which is like it's kind of an old word for a crazy person, like a kook or kooky.
Was about to ask, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
The advantage is that it's not really used very much, but it gets that nice like short 4-letter word, like doom, or I guess blood isn't four letters, but it has the 2 O's in there, or dusk.
Yeah.
Quake is more than 4 letters, but it's just like a nice 1-word thing. So that is my current one. You can add that to your wish list and check out some more info about it on the Steam page.
Nice.
And then Digital Paint Paintball 2 is not on Steam. That's just digitalpaint.org if you want to check that out. Not in Godot, but maybe someday. But yeah, that's
it'd be nice if you got
fun
that.
little free game.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be adding all of those links down under the episode as well. Yeah, so that it's easier for people, maybe not to remember, but definitely to click them and visit them.
Appreciate that.
But remember, if you forgot, you remembered. It's such a good line, by the way. That's awesome. All right.
If you've forgotten, you've remembered.
Based off the forgotten.
Yeah.
So again, thank you very much. And that was the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks.